So we're going to look at the last of the couples in Genesis. We talked about Adam and Eve. If you weren't in the last session, we talked about Isaac and Rebekah. Let's go to Genesis 15. Let's spend a few moments here today looking at Abraham and Sarah and some things we can learn from their marriage. Genesis 15. As you're finding your spot there, my wife Heidi has a cousin. Her name is Katie, and they have an autistic daughter whose name is Bella. She's the sweetest girl. She's probably, I would say physically, she probably would look like maybe a fourth grader, fourth grader. Mentally and developmentally, she would be much younger as far as how she interacts. Very verbal. Autism is a spectrum, right? So you can have someone who's highly functioning. She would be, I'd say, kind of in the middle, if that's a way of describing it. She normally has headphones on to kind of block out noise things, but this cutest, sweetest girl. And what she will do is if you go to their house, I just met her for the first time. Heidi's been talking about her for several months. I just hadn't met her. She gave me a big old hug when I came. She's just very, touchy, in that way, very affectionate. But she will, when you go to her house, their house, you take off your shoes. So when you go in the house and you go up to sit, it's like a split level. You come in, there's like this little landing that goes down the basement or upstairs. When you go upstairs to sit, she steals your shoes. She hides them. And her strategy is that if you can't find your shoes, you can't leave her house. Like, she wants you to stay, but that's her way of telling you that. And then once you find your shoes, which usually my wife's cousin will help, hunt them down wherever she's tucked them away, she will then, when you leave, she will take a stuffed animal from her bedroom and put it in your spot where you were sitting. So she's like trying to keep you, and then when you leave, she almost like grieves that or processes that. But what's interesting is I watch, Katie is her name, and her husband, their life has not gone as planned. In fact, Bella, as much as she is a blessing and a gift, that changes their life moving forward, right? Caring for her. Some of you may have that in your family. And one of the things I found challenging in marriage is that we operate in a world that's not perfect with a marriage that we're trying to grow and change and be what God wants us to be. And I want to talk about some things that hopefully will help you deal with the flaws. Because I think even in these settings, it's tempting in like a couples retreat or a family conference like this, is that all sounds good, but we in the real world are dealing with this or that. And so I hope that these things will give you hope and direction to navigate the Bella kind of both gifts and maybe burdens or challenges that you deal with in your marriage. This is not, the target audience of this is not those who have like 6 months to live, and trying to figure out how to finish strong in marriage. This is for all of us. We're all aging. We're all navigating the grind and the burdens of life as they increase at times. But with that in mind, I read an article the other day from the BBC that said this: the U.S. has one of the highest divorce rates in the world, even though over the past 4 decades it has fallen among younger couples. Instead, middle-aged and older adults have taken over this stat. In fact, adults age 65 and older are now the only age group in the U.S. with a growing divorce rate. Isn't that crazy? Like, when I think about those I know who are 65 and older, I view them as like the steady ones. But in the world, especially our country as a whole, their rate is going up. Today, roughly 36% of people getting divorced are 50 or older. 36%. Compared to only 8.7% in the year 1990. And what it's being referred to by sociologists is what's called gray divorce. Like, most of the time when I think of divorce, I think of maybe empty nest stage would be about the most advanced stage that I would expect divorce to be something we're vulnerable to. But divorce is graying. And so I think there are reasons for that. For one, we're living longer statistically, so there's some factors there. But I think a lot of it is just the grind of life and opting out of what seems to be more of a burden than a blessing. So, as you know, Abraham was told, "In thee shall all nations be blessed." So him and Sarah staying together and doing so sweetly was key to all nations being blessed. Do not think today that you guys fighting for your marriage doesn't matter. As you get older, you tend to feel like I'm losing relevance, I'm losing stamina, capacity to influence others. And I'm just saying, some of you, your kids and grandkids just need to see you stay together. And the world, the flesh, and the devil are trying to convince you that you have an out, you have a legitimate reason because life got so hard or your spouse disappointed you, that it's not worth the fight, it's not worth sticking together, and nothing could be further from the truth. So let's talk about today, in the time we have left, 2 God-focused attitudes, that if we will have these 2 attitudes, we can get marriage right, we can keep marriage right, no matter what curveballs life throws at us as a couple. All right, so let's talk about these. Number 1, we need to persevere with patience toward unfulfilled dreams. So we have to be patient with things that have not happened that we wished and dreamed and hoped would occur. One of the things that happens for Heidi and I regularly is we will be in a conversation as a couple with someone else, and because she's talking to someone else, I tune out. Any of you guys relate to this? And so I end up revealing I wasn't listening by telling them the same story she just told them. This has happened like multiple times, to the point that Heidi she's not even thrown by it. She just keeps moving, rolls her eyes, like, here we go again. He wasn't listening. I heard the other day a wife who said this: I would do anything for my husband except repeat myself calmly for the 4th time. Like, I may do it, but not calmly. Like, doesn't marriage require a lot of patience toward each other, with each other? I just started a new argument for some of you. Sorry about bringing that up. Patience is a key piece of this. So I don't know what you picture when you when you think of these chapters we're going to study for a moment, but Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90. They had to wait a long time for some of the things that they had dreamed and hoped. I mean, just to have a child, there was so much there, as many of you that have navigated infertility would know. And so there was some patience that had to be expressed. And what happens is, with the passage of time, it tends to create a shortness of temper toward one another. Whatever that thing you've been waiting on professionally, personally, relationally, physically, the temptation is to take that out on the person who is closest to us versus we need to come together as we wait on this, believing that God can still work and He will redeem this waiting period for our benefit in His glory. All right, so let me give you 2 aspects of this patience that we'll just briefly look at a couple little examples in the story for sake of time. Number 1, we need covenantal patience or covenant patience. So our patience has to be on a covenant level. It can't just be fickle. It has to be faithful. Covenant patience. And I think our lack of patience reveals where we are not invested in our marriage as much as we pretend and posture to be. If you're committed to someone, you're patient with them. And I think where you have impatience versus excusing it, you need to say, that's a reference point from where I'm not quite as committed to my wife or my husband or to the Lord as I would like people to believe. So go back to Genesis, and let's look in chapter 15, verse 2 and following. I know you know the story, most of you, if not all of you, but just to make sure we don't assume anything. Go to verse 2 of 15 of Genesis. And Abraham said, Lord, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abraham said, Behold, to me you have given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is my heir. So he's basically saying, is my steward, is this Eliezer the one that's going to fulfill these promises? Verse 4, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This shall not be your heir, but he will come forth out of your own bowels, he shall be your heir. And he brought him forth abroad and said, notice this, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if you be able to number them. And he said unto him, Abraham, so shall your seed be. And he believed, notice, he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And so you have Abraham who just wants one kid, and instead God has him he's trying to expand his faith. He says, look at the stars. There's going to be more of your descendants from you, physically from you, than even are able to be counted. So faith, this is a key thought today, because I think we tend to, like if I said to you, give me the best story you ever heard on a couple who trusted God, your story probably will be someone who had a huge breakthrough. And there was like this instantaneous zap of like a miracle. And right now, my wife and I are praying for that. But it's kind of like the overnight miracle that's taking years. Is kind of where we're at in the phase we're at. And here's what I would say to you. One of the best profiles of faith is not the couple who named it, claimed it, and saw it. It was the couple who just waited. Like some of the best things you can do to demonstrate that you trust God is just to wait on Him. And I'm telling you, God is worth waiting on. And you got to remind each other of that when you're tempted to start doubting God. When that grandkid that's not saved, that you're trying to pray him to Jesus, and that difficult grown child that's wayward or whatever. We go through all kinds of scenarios. One of the best evidences of faith is we just say, we're going to wait on God. No matter how old we are, no matter how difficult this situation, no matter how long it takes, we're going to trust God. And so Abraham models his faith by waiting upon God. And it was redemptive. It led to the relationship that we know that he had with the Lord. Now, we don't have time to read it, but in chapter 15 here, there's a really kind of super weird story of this sleep that falls on Abraham in verses 12 through following. And basically, here's a summary of it. In this culture, if two people were trying to prove that they meant what they said, they would form a covenant. They would cut up a bunch of animals, split them in half, which is where kind of the weird part is. And then both parties would walk between these severed halves of an animal, which basically was saying, we're going to do what we say, and if we don't, so be it unto us. Like, this has dire consequences. What's interesting here in the end of this chapter is after God makes this promise, Abraham falls asleep, and only God walks between those animals. Which, what does that mean? That the promise that Abraham was waiting on depended only on God. Isn't that what's most frustrating in our marriage? Is that a lot of things that we are trusting God to do, we can't make it happen. Whether that is infertility, whether that is a wayward child, whatever the specific thing may be, a physical limitation, that it is God that has to do it. And so there is this patience we exhibit, our faith in waiting upon God and relying upon Him. All right, let me show you this next slide. This is the best way I've ever heard how marriage should be a covenant. And I didn't give you this on your handout if you want to grab it with your phone maybe. But this is why our relationship with our spouse has to be not fickle or circumstantial. It's got to be covenant. And I think this is why as we age, we start wandering apart. So it starts with a covenant, as you see there. This comes from gospelcare.org. Covenant anchors your vows in something bigger than yourself and before God and witnesses. So you're anchoring your commitment to one another in something more than just yourself, because self often is fickle and not faithful, right? I don't feel like it. I don't like you. In fact, I'd like to maybe be a little distant with you. So your commitment to one another as you move through life must be anchored in something bigger than yourself. And he emphasizes the communal aspect of that as well. Commitment keeps, secondly, so out of that grows commitment. Commitment keeps you steady when storms come and emotions waver. So covenant leads to this commitment, not perfectly, but in a progressive way, which then expands to this love that grows deeper, richer, and more enduring. In the soil, what we plant our love in has to be more than superficial things, in the soil of covenant and commitment. Does that visual make sense to you? So what I see, and you're thinking maybe, Harley, I thought this was going to be more on the topic of like disappointments and failures. That's all relevant, but if you don't get this right, you don't have the systems you need to navigate those specifics. Because whatever I would speak on specifically, and we'll talk about a few examples in a moment, some of it would apply to you and some of it wouldn't, but this applies to all of us. And so you've got to have that foundation that we see Abraham establishing between him and God, this covenant kind of relationship that everything depends on and rests upon who God is. So what ultimately will infuse our marriage with a fresh dose of patience is not how well we hold to our commitments to God or one another. It's the fact that God keeps His commitments to us. And all I'm saying to you today is no matter how it feels, no matter how difficult life is, and how far you are from the couple who writes a book on a successful marriage, like how far you're the opposite of that, God still is committed to you. He's committed to your marriage. He's committed to everything in your life that so worries you and burdens you. And He is committed to being a part of helping you navigate those as a couple and a family. All right, so covenant patience is a key piece of how we persevere with patience. All right, number 2, abstinent patience. So we wait on God because we have a covenant relationship with God. Secondly, we don't settle for anything less than that. We are abstinent with our patience. I had somebody the other day send me a video clip. like those like mattresses in a box. Like I don't know what marriage you have or mattress you have as a couple, but you want to start a new argument, go look for a new mattress. All right, that'll be an interesting. Heidi and I've done that a few times. It's like I thought we got along, and then here we are with this salesman pressuring us, or we're online trying to figure out what and you're like, this is irreversible. Some have a return policy, but the ones that are hilarious are the ones that come in a box. Like there's some brands where that's what it is. And this video was a montage of people opening up the box without realizing how quickly the mattress fills the horizon of your life. And it's a bunch of people like whiplash, like slammed up against a wall. One guy got flipped over a counter. I'm like, this is like AI. There's no way this is legit. But where these, like, it just gets out of control. Like you open up the box and then it just like fills your life, and several got injured, I think it looked like in the video. Can I say to you that without patience, we will start to develop bedfellows or develop associations to take a shortcut to what we know God has promised us. And all I'm saying to you, not only is God the one who's going to deliver on the promise, but if you want what He promises, you got to wait for Him to do it His way and in His timing. And I think one of the main reasons for marriage is to remind each other when we get impatient that the shortcut is settling. The shortcut is shorter, and we get the quick fix. But I'm telling you, you stack that up against what God has promised you as a couple, and it always is inferior, to say the least. So Abraham and Sarah had to navigate this, and they actually made some missteps that we can learn from. If you look in chapter 16, verse 1 says, Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. So you know the story, what happens. Sarah says, listen, I'm 90 plus, you're 100 plus, you might still be able to have a child. Let's real quick see if we can scramble and make this happen with my handmaiden's help. So she gives Hagar to Abraham, and she conceives, and all that came as a result of that we don't have time to talk about today. But we know God never told them to do that, right? And so they take this shortcut. This was a different day, but still this was out of bounds from God's perspective. They take the shortcut. They are not patient to wait upon the Lord. In fact, Hagar, they got her in Egypt when they bailed. God deliver on His promises will never age well. And we all know when we're doing that, right? Lecturing the adult son or daughter when they're not even receptive to the truth they are. Pressing the issue on something, I'm not saying medical intervention isn't a viable option, but I've seen two couples do the same exact procedure, like in vitro type things, and their motive is completely different. One is healthy and faith-filled, and the other is just trying to circumnavigate what God has clearly revealed to them. No judgment on my part, because I've been there too, but we've got to make sure that we are not taking shortcuts that God has not led us to, especially as we move through life. So then if you go to chapter 17, God comes to Abraham. Again, I'm giving you just a quick overview. He says, I'm going to give through Sarah. You tried it with Hagar, and then she's thrown out of the camp. But God reminds him. Abraham falls on his face, verse 17 of chapter 17 of Genesis, laughed and said, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 90? Then he says, Shall Ishmael, this would be the son by Hagar, he might live before you, or he might be the one that is the fulfillment? God says, no, it's going to come through Sarah, and it's through her son Isaac that you will experience my promises. So we see God reminding Abraham to be waiting upon the Lord. And I think it's even merciful that God, even though they tried a shortcut, God said, no, I'm still going to do it the way I originally intended. That's His grace and His mercy. A quick example of this with marriage, because I think we focus on, in these settings like we are today, young couples, like healthy family weekends. We tend to focus on those with young children. Do you know that 60% of divorces, U.S.-wise, happen during menopause? So it's those kind of moments where we're in better times or easier times or more understandable times that we're all used to, and we're kind of on autopilot. We would never bail on God in those moments, but we tend to lose our sense of abstinence when things get different or difficult And so that's what we're talking about here. We must be patient because God is a covenant-keeping God. And number two, we have to be patient because He requires us to stay within bounds of what He has revealed to us. One of the greatest temptations in clock ticking, whatever that is specifically, and then to take shortcuts with site-based analysis and words about things that are not trending in the right direction. So we're thinking and listening to others instead of God. Where are you eyeing the shortcut or even have tried the shortcut? Abraham and Sarah should give you hope that there's a way back to His promises. Last thought on this would be, we'll move to our second point. I love this thought. Here it is. And I'm a driven guy. I always like to have 50 balls in the air. And I'm stressed about it, but I'd be more stressed if I didn't have any in the air. But here's the statement. Direction is more important than speed. Have you ever known someone, they're going all over the place, but there's no planning, there's no assessment? Direction is more important than speed. And nowhere is that truer than in relation to our God. It's more important that you ask yourself as a couple, are we going in the right direction, than how quick till we get there and what's the shortest way to get what we want out of God. So it's walking with God, being patient with God, resting in Him that He will deliver in His time and way. So I gave you a couple questions there. These would be ones for you to discuss on your own time. I mentioned in the last session, maybe it was the first session, if I were counseling you, I tried to wire this, structure this in the way that if you said, hey, Harley, we want you to speak into our marriage with biblical principles, these would be assignments I would give you if we were having this conversation. As a couple, ask yourselves, where are impatient shortcuts revealing that we have given up on God's promises in our marriage? So you ought to wrestle with that as a couple. Number two, what is the first area that we need to resume holding out for God's best and His timing? So even if you have given up, where do we need to lean back into that and exhibit the patience that God wants us to have? All right, number two, let's spend a few moments here and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions today or comments. Number two, persevere with confidence toward unfulfilled dreams. So we persevere with patience. Number two, we persevere with confidence. Last night after dinner, I was joking. Some of you didn't hear this story. Tim and I had dinner together, and the waitress walked up and said, what's the special occasion you're celebrating? We're like, unfortunately, in our world today, two guys having dinner can be misconstrued. And so Tim kept talking about my friend Harley, my dear friend Harley, but he kept emphasizing friend. So we had that little kind of goofy moment. And there was a wedding going at the venue we were at as well, so maybe that was on the radar. But anyway, so we leave, and the Detroit Pistons are playing. And he's technically driving, but on his phone is the recap of the first half. And there was little jerks, and I kept watching. I wasn't watching the game. I was trying to live to the next exit. But he's getting more frustrated as the Pistons go down further and further. And it ended with him dropping me off at the hotel. It was halftime. I think you guys were down 30 or whatever it was. And so I got a text from Tim late last night, or for me late. I was already in bed. But he said, speaking of the Pistons, they outscored the Magic 55-19 in the second half. Can I just say to you, do not forget that our God tends to do His best stuff in the second half of life. The second half of marriage. The second half of whatever you feel like is a reasonable amount of time for God to show up and do something. Don't give up on God. And I think one of the things you can leave as a legacy to the next generation is there's a couple, despite all the facts to the contrary, didn't bail on God. They kept their confidence in God. They maintained their confidence in God. Is a key piece of a healthy family that you can model to them. And when you don't have that, this is especially for the men, I think this would apply to you, but even to you ladies, a lot of times marriage in the home is a place where your confidence gets eroded. You talk down each other, or you just worry out loud together. Is your marriage regularly talking about the promises of God? And the ones He's already fulfilled, and the ones that you've yet to see Him fulfill? Is that the language coming from the dinner table? Is that the stuff, if I could be a fly on the wall to hear your conversations at night or in the morning, is there a confidence in God? If it's not, so the story in chapter 18, if you go there and just kind of peruse over it with your eyes, you'll see that, remember, God shows up. I think it's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ with two angels. And God says to Sarah, who's kind of in the background of this meal that's going on, Sarah at this time next year is going to have a child, and she laughs, right, in the background. Not a laugh of like incredulity, like, I can't believe God will do this. She doubted. And so God is helping her work through her doubts before he provides the fulfillment of his promise. And what I love about the story, if you would look at verses 9 through 15, is that God, literally God and Sarah out loud talk through her doubts. Like, I know for me, I don't naturally skew toward confidence. I am a cynical by nature person. Are you? Yeah, right. You know, whatever. And maybe it's just my profession or whatever. But I tend to skew toward whatever you're saying until proven otherwise. You're with God, he's willing to let us in his presence work through our doubts and to allow us to renew our confidence and to strengthen our confidence in him. I hope this doesn't come across too melodramatic, but I remember one season with my son where he was having an especially difficult night last winter. And it ended with him sitting in the snow beside one of the streets in our little subdivision and me sitting on the ground across from him trying to convince him to come back home. Tough moment. In fact, it's still hard to drive by that little part of our city, our town. And I remember saying to him, Landon, Mom and I have no idea what we're doing. We love you. Come home. Let's figure this out. Just even revealing that I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to handle this actually diffuses the situation, right? I think for many of us, the reason we don't have confidence in God is because we don't have anywhere we can say that we lack confidence, that we doubt God. Like, is your marriage a safe place to say, I'm doubting God right now? If it's safe enough to talk it through as we see God doing with Sarah, then it should be okay for your spouse to be able to say to you, I hear you, but I'm just having trouble believing that. It ought to be a safe space where those kind of conversations can happen. That's a healthy thing. And so you ought to be a part of facilitating that and modeling that to your spouse. Abraham's in the Hall of Faith, right? Like, he's known as the dude who trusted God. God had spoken to him. Do you see that? How he says, as he said, as he said, as he spoken. Basically, God's like, yeah, I told you. And it went exactly as I promised. And so we can trust God that he will fulfill his promises to us. You as a couple can never go wrong, no matter what others are saying, to just trust God to fulfill his word. It's where we get progress in this area of confidence. I love the layout of your building. Last time I was here, it was just open. The steel was on. I think maybe the steel decking was on the roof, but it was like mud trying to crawl or slide or climb up here to meet Tim, and we just walked around and prayed over the project and that kind of pause I think you guys had for a bit. But I love your kids' wing. Imagine tomorrow. Just imagine this for a second to put this into our world. Imagine tomorrow you see a lady come in who is 90 plus with her child saying, I'd like to check my baby into the nursery. Like, just, what would you think? I know what I would think. I don't know if I can say it out loud. I'm trying to think how to say it diplomatically. You're crazy, okay? It'll be probably something to that effect. A 90-year-old woman who has just had a child. Like, that's the same God that you woke up and prayed to today. That's the same God that gave us the chapters that we've read today. Like, he's that God. And he hasn't changed. And I think the temptation as we age is to let things begin to creep in that convince us otherwise. Sarah was open to what God had promised to her. Now, here's what's amazing. You ladies can appreciate this better than me. But it says in verse 6, Sarah says, God has made me to laugh. The name Isaac means laugh. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck, for I have borne him a son in his old age, and the child grew and was weaned. You know what's alluded to there? Physically, she was able to actually nurse as a 9. So not only did she have a child, she nursed. I mean, the whole thing is just, it's an absolute miracle. It's an impossibility without God in the equation. And yet because they trusted God, God delivered on his promises to them. I think one of the things I would encourage you with that I'm trying to practice right now is I think the reason God has us wait is because often He's trying to do more in our families and in our marriage that we realize. It takes time to build what He's building. An author the other day I read said this: you prayed for a door to open, but maybe God is building a whole house for you. Be patient. His plans are bigger than you can imagine. And that's not just empty talk today. I'm just saying God might be trying to do more in your family than you realize. Just trust Him. Just wait on Him and model that to your kids, your grandkids. Give space for God to build and construct what He is building and constructing. So, are you willing to let God uniquely validate His ability through your painfully prolonged inability? It's only possible if you choose to place your confidence in Him, not in others, and to not allow others or yourself to limit what is possible when God gets involved. All right, these two questions, and I'll get to a couple of closing thoughts. Where do the ways that this is for you guys to discuss as couples, where do the ways we feel and don't feel and talk about the future reveal our confidence in God is eroding? If you would ask me how to identify someone, I talked about this yesterday with some of your leaders, how someone is suicidal, one of the key questions is, as far as ideating, how do they talk about the future? And I think you ought to ask yourselves as a couple, how do we talk about the future? How do we feel about the future? Is it just like a nosedive into oblivion? Or is it up and to the right? Is there a positive outlook about the future? That often exposes how much we have confidence or don't have confidence in the Lord. Secondly, what immediate step do we as a couple need to take to rebuild and to maintain our confidence in God? What you watch, what you listen to. There's certain songs that Heidi and I cling to right now, where have you ever heard before, words make you think a thought, music makes you feel a feeling, a song makes you feel a thought. And I'm sure we'll have that tomorrow in our worship here. Sometimes you just need to feel it, right? You need to feel that thought. And so feed your soul with whatever is needed. Feed your marriage with whatever is going to renew and bolster that confidence in the Lord. All right, the books that I gave you there at the bottom, these are specific to this session. A Seasoned Marriage. This is a new book by Larry McCall. It's been out just a year or two. Living the Gospel in the Middle Years and Beyond is a really good book on dealing with just some of the unique things of middle age and beyond in the marriage dynamic that I found very helpful with those I counsel, even my own marriage, as I'm entering that phase. Number 2, When Sinners Say I Do. This is just a good overview of our flaws. We didn't talk about it much, but the sin that happened with Hagar was something Sarah and Abraham had to work through. The mistakes or the sin made, and so some of it is things that we do to ourselves that have to be forgiven and repented of. Number 3, these are 2 books that just came out recently on specifically, one of the big areas where failure comes in would be pornography or other sexual sin or infidelity. And these are 2 books written by a couple. The first one would be To the Man, Redeem Your Marriage. The second one is written by his wife, Reclaim, and it's just about how a wife who has been cheated on or discovers her husband is engaged in any kind of those things, how to resolve those. Those are by the Solomons. Those are very good books I've found to be very helpful, so I encourage you to check those out. Okay, one last thought, and then we will open it up for some discussion. We have about 10 minutes left here. My in-laws, my father-in-law, we live in Amish country, Ohio. Okay, so that caveat. My father-in-law's name is Moses Yoder. Okay? In fact, his middle name is M, just M, which means his dad. This is how the Amish roll, or slowly roll. Their middle initial indicates their dad's first name. So his dad's name was Moses. So Moses M. Yoder is my father-in-law's name. And unfortunately, their dog that they've had for about 14 years died this last week. And the hard part, all of us who have dogs, is there's memories, right? There's people often connected to those seasons of life. And that dog, we initially got the dog while raising a toddler, and we realized we couldn't do both at the same time. So we gifted the dog to my in-laws. So they've had it now for maybe 12, 13 years. During that time, Heidi's brother, her only brother, had some very severe mental health struggles, and he passed away about 3.5 years ago. So there was connections between that dog and now their deceased son. And so this last week was tough for them. And one of the farmers in our church allowed them to bury the dog in this little pet cemetery he's got, nothing official, there in the countryside of Wayne County, Ohio. But they left somehow when they were burying the dog, I got an accidental voicemail, which is kind of scary because you're like, what are they going to, like, it was like this weird, like, you know, we talk about like butt dial or whatever, like accident. Somehow, while they're like saying their last words, I don't know if I could have been there without laughing. You know, my view on it as far as pets and things at times isn't the most sensitive, but we weren't there, but we were there. We didn't know we were going to be there. So there's this little voicemail, and it's my mother-in-law who's kind of just, you know, sobbing or working through the emotions of it, and my father-in-law is talking. And here was one line I wanted to read to you that's just, it's sad, but it's also sweet and also a bit funny. He said, if we didn't care for each other, it wouldn't hurt so bad. So he's trying to comfort my mother-in-law. He says, you know, we could be glad to get rid of each other because we don't like each other. And then he said, there are people like that. And then click, the voicemail ended. But it was basically like, this grief is an indication that we love each other and we want to be together forever, which was kind of a sweet thing. Do you know that there are people that every relationship is discardable. Every relationship is just a season of life. And I want to say to you, both our marriages should not be viewed that way, and more importantly, our God does not view us that way. It's not like, maybe I'll stick around to see what happens. He is fully committed to us. He is not going to discard us. He's not going to cast us off forever. And as we age, we've got to believe that anew and afresh every day with the help of the Lord. Even like older couples, like some of you today that are ahead of me a bit, do you know that any couple you see that's doing okay has had to forgive each other a lot? Like, you're not here together. Any of you, either your spouse is in another room or you're with, like, you haven't gotten to this season without a lot of things under the bridge, right? Disappointments, failures. And so if we know that's the way we've gotten to this point, it also is going to be the way forward as we honor the Lord. All right, let me show you this last graphic.